Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. The second part thereof for the 31st of January 2025. We must be getting closer to reintegrating into UK society because I'm almost producing no, I'm not. I'm far off what I normally produce. But anyway, we're going to start this military aid video with a little look at Lithuania. So, Lithuanian Foreign Minister, actually, well, this is Euromaidan Press getting this wrong. He is no longer Foreign Minister, of course. He's a former Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis. He's urged the EU to increase aid to Ukraine. He stressed that the war approaching its fourth year, the EU must learn from its mistakes and bolster its support to strengthen Ukraine's defences. Well, actually, meanwhile, Lithuania last week delivered manpads to Ukraine. So those are man-portable air defence systems, those sort of ones you put on your shoulder like the Stinger, or the UK has kind of martlets, various different ones that do the job there. According to the country's Ministry of Defence, for security reasons, the specific model and quantity of the systems were not disclosed. So that's good news from Lithuania. Now, Ukraine is to ratify an agreement with the UK, £2 billion for air defence and repair bases. The government will submit a bill to Parliament for the ratification of the framework agreement, which will provide funding for air defence systems and missile procurement. Okay, this is interesting. More repair bases in Ukraine is obviously beneficial. You are shortening the time needed and money, fuel, etc., needed to go and get a vehicle repaired, and that vehicle then, or piece of equipment or whatever it is, then gets back to being utilised far more quickly. So that's excellent, far quicker. Just a little note to say that the UK is, and this is where I've got to be careful, the sort of things I say, but I will say this: the UK is involved in Ukraine in quite a significant way. That's something I've definitely learned since I've been out here, from speaking to various sources, that the UK is doing a really good job behind the scenes. There's an awful lot of stuff going on that the UK is involved in. And I'm not saying that from a kind of pro-UK point of view. That didn't come from that kind of source. And I'm not saying that because of who I am, but it is just interesting that the UK is very, very much involved in supporting Ukraine in many ways that people aren't aware of. So that is good news there. Okay, moving on. Croatia has announced its 12th military aid package for Ukraine. Prime Minister Andrej Plenković and Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal shared the news during a joint press conference in Zagreb. The new military technical assistance package is expected to be approved tomorrow, which would be actually, that was the 29th, so that should have been yesterday. I've not heard any more details about this, so I'd be quite interested to see what military aid package the Croatians have put together for the Ukrainians. Now, two things from Israel. First of all, there was this rumor that Israel were going to provide weapons that they picked up off people like Hezbollah, old Soviet equipment. It's not going to be a huge amount of it, just the bits and pieces they've got from here and there, and get that to Ukraine. Well, Israel has decided not to transfer captured Russian weapons to Ukraine, says their ambassador Brodsky. While an ex-MP proposed the idea, it was never passed by any such decision lies solely with the Israeli Defense Ministry, which has not approved it, he emphasized. So that isn't actually happening. Now, far more importantly, though, is this. Patriot interceptors, no longer needed by Israel, are making their way to Ukraine. As Axios notes, Benjamin Netanyahu had long resisted this triangular transfer through the US, but relented a few months ago. So good news, but with a bittersweet flavour politically. Okay, so this is not just about the interceptors. So remember, there are 8 Patriot systems, older PAC-2 systems, I think, that are potentially available for Ukraine. So this could be part of a much, much larger delivery of incredibly important air defense systems. So Israeli officials stick to the line that they are not themselves transferring anything to Ukraine. This lack of courage, says Edward Hunter Christie, towards Russia remains frankly embarrassing when smaller, more vulnerable European states are openly giving artillery and more openly and directly to Kyiv. The critique aside, at least the right thing is finally being done, and there is an interesting triangular game at the strategic level too. As fighting in the Middle East winds down, there should be more leeway for the US to devote military assistance to Ukraine. Of course, Trump administration notwithstanding. While Biden and his team were likable individuals from a European perspective, we did end up in a very tight spot due to Biden team's tight leash on what could go to Ukraine and due to American trade-offs in resources and the tension caused by the Middle East. Trump's instructive desire to press for war termination everywhere opens up both new opportunities and new threats. The opportunities, one, as mentioned above, muscular deterrence in the Middle East can redirect attention and resources to help Ukraine. Two, if Putin is too arrogant to make concessions, which is likely, this could lead to Trump pushing for the war to terminate very much in Moscow's disfavor. He'll start twisting Russia's arm, and Russia's arm will break. Now, the threat. Trump opens up an excessive concessions to Moscow. Putin wises up and grabs them. Russia scores a victory, a costly one, but nonetheless a victory, and future danger is heightened. Immediately after Trump leaves office, Russia reloads and shoots. So that's a potential as to what could happen if things go badly vis-a-vis Trump supporting or not supporting Ukraine. Okay, moving on to France. France will deliver their Mirage 2000-5 fighter jets to Ukraine by the end of the first quarter of 2025. There were thoughts that they could get 3 imminently. Maybe they have, who knows? But the French foreign minister has officially said they'll get the jets by the end of the first quarter. So that's going to be really the end of March. Now, German aid to Ukraine has a couple of things to say. First of all, 10 backhoe loaders financed by the German Foreign Office were recently handed over to the National Guard of Ukraine. They are intended for engineering and stabilization work in the rear positions and to assist citizens in the front line and deoccupied territories. So this is good. These kind of excavators are super useful. And Germany's providing a bunch of those. People like Constantine are always raising money for excavators and whatnot because they are such vital pieces of equipment and the Ukrainians just don't have enough of them. The latest update says German aid to Ukraine on bilateral assistance provided to Ukraine by Germany. Total aid now stands at 43.6 billion euros from the Germans, while particularly the military assistance has increased compared to the last update, which is a plus 3.25 billion. And if you want to see the infographic there, you can see all the aid that Germany is given to Ukraine there in its different constituent parts. So I'll let you check that out yourself at your leisure. Okay, then just to continue, says the fact that very significant proportion of total bilateral assistance has to be spent on the accommodation and support of over 1 million Ukrainian people seeking protection in Germany is still easy to observe there. Actually, that's just reminded me that German Aid sent me a link that I need to share with you as well. And actually, what he was sharing with me is from the Lithuanian MOD. So going back to what Lithuania have done, the Lithuanian military has had aid-filled trucks arriving in Ukraine, continuing to enhance Ukraine's military capabilities. They delivered thousands of drones from Lithuanian manufacturers, as well as thermal cameras and 5-ton telescopic handlers, which look something like that. So the Lithuanians still doing a good job there. So that's just an addendum to the Lithuanian segment. Thanks, German aid to Ukraine. Right, Max 24 is quoting Jan Lipavsky here from the Czech Republic, from Czechia. We are currently looking at how we can fund a new artillery ammunition initiative for Ukraine, and then we'll see how many shells we can get for that money. So, of course, the Czech initiative has been incredibly successful in getting artillery ammunition from around the world sorted out, through some quality control, and then to the Ukrainians. That, I presume, has come to an end, or is due to come to an end. Of course, the Ukrainians will need a continued provision of that kind of ammunition to them. Now, Finland has developed an anti-personnel drone, the Steel Eagle, for Ukraine. A charge contains explosives and shoots steel and tungsten bullets. The bullets are capable of piercing the roof of a conventional or highly armored vehicle from a height of several dozen meters. So that could be like the airburst one we saw taking out that boat the other day. It could even be this drone. So I guess bullets is probably the wrong word. Maybe the correct word. I don't know, but it appears to be a kind of airburst form of ordnance on it. Now, Ukraine and Russia are hunting invisible fiber optic drones with microphones, infrared lasers, and other techniques as well, according to Forbes. Ukrainian tech firm Karadag pioneers detection systems using sound arrays and infrared scanning to spot Russia's cable-controlled drones. It's quite similar to what they do with the Shahid drones, where they've got audio recorders all around the country, listening out for the sound of the drones, and that there's an audio triangulation that goes on to detect and keep a track of the Shahid drones as they come over Ukrainian airspace. Well, that similar approach appears to be being used, and other forms such as infrared scanning, to look out for these fiber optic drones that are unfortunately not susceptible to electronic warfare. Now, Ukraine may introduce voluntary contract service for men aged 18 to 25. The presidential office plans to propose legislative changes soon. The initiative will be purely voluntary, focusing on financial incentives for those who choose to enlist. So it's a reaction to the pressure for mobilization in that very sensitive age group from 18 to 25, a cohort or set of cohorts where they don't actually have that many fighting age men, really, or men. And they're trying to protect those cohorts. So instead, what they're doing is putting in training in place for those in and outside of education, different training depending on whether you are in education or not, and that gives you your leg up. So you've already got your kind of basic training done, kind of not quite national service, but it is sort of national service, but training, and then they are making it easier to volunteer, to try and get those boots on the ground that they so desperately need. And we've heard about this constantly from everyone. It is just obviously an ongoing issue. Now, in February, the third wave of Ukrainian volunteers in Poland will sign contracts with the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Ambassador Vasil Bodnar expects this trend to grow as efforts to inform Ukrainians abroad about recruitment centres like in Lublin intensify. So that's good news, trying to get those Ukrainians from abroad in diaspora communities to sign up for the armed forces and fight for their country. Now, Ukraine has received Addendum 155mm artillery shells. I don't know if this is from the US, because I've got a whole US section coming up, so I'll just kind of whack this in at the end here. Ukraine has received Addendum 155mm artillery shells that work the same way as ram shells. So these are the ones that fire up and drop mines remotely, or to sort of drop them from a single shell. So these are loaded with 36 M72 anti-personnel mines. So instead, the normal RAM ones will drop 9 M718A1 anti-tank mines. So fire it up. Often they can drop them, as they did in Vuhledar, drop it behind the vehicles that have moved up in a column, cleared their way through minefields, and they think, well, this is all safe now. And then when they go back, they blow themselves up on mines that weren't there when they drove forward, between positions and whatnot. So really, really useful shells, these. Arms Procurement Chief Bezrukova has been dismissed, according to the Defense Ministry, after disputes. Now, there are these big disputes in Ukraine at the moment between Rustem Umerov and others. There's all sorts of issues going on, supposedly with defense procurement. The Defense Procurement Agency. There's been a week of escalating tensions between the MOD and defense procurement. So she seems to have been the latest in the fall guy. We'll see if there are further issues. Some, I think, are calling for Rustem Umerov, the defense minister, to step aside. Now, the Russian Sarmat missile, this is the intercontinental ballistic missile it's had 4 tests. I think 3 of them have been failures. If you remember, it blew up in the silo about, I don't know, a couple of months ago. In fact, probably got that here, 21st September. So the RS-28 Sarmat, code name after this Sarmatians, NATO reporting name SSX-29 or X-30, often colloquially referred to as a Satan II by media outlets, as a 3-stage, silo-based, liquid-fueled, HGV-capable and FOBS-capable, super-heavy intercontinental ballistic missile. Okay, so there you go. So this is a big one that they were talking about being like super amazing. And it's very new. It's still going through the kind of testing phase. But it doesn't seem to have been too successful. Anton Goroshenko says Russian Sarmat missile might not be as great a weapon as Russia wants it to be. So there are all these kind of propagandistic claims you can see on TV from these kind of protests where they walk around these cities with like missiles on top of cars, and they're all talking about this missile. Anyway, it's not quite as good a weapon as Russia wants it to be, because it was developed by Ukrainians. By waging a war against Ukraine, Russia's lost its access to Ukrainian experts in the area. If you've been following me for a while, says Gerashenko, you probably have have heard Russian propagandists threaten various countries with Sarmat strikes. The video is a compilation of the best ones. Make sure you watch it till the end. However, according to Business Insider, Russia has many issues with developing its Sarmat missiles. Quote, historically, a lot of intercontinental ballistic missiles manufacturing plants and personnel were based in Ukraine. Timothy Wright, missile expert in the National Institute for Strategic Studies, says in 2014, after the Russian annexation of Crimea, Ukraine terminated joint military projects with Russia. According to experts, the two strategic missile developers in Russia, Makeyev Rocket Design Bureau, which makes the Sarmat, and the Moscow Institute of Thermal Technology, don't have recent experience in developing liquid fuel ICBMs, of which Sarmat is one. Now, in September 2024, a Sarmat missile exploded during a test launch. Satellite images showed a large crater around its launch pad. Missile experts say the Sarmat had multiple other issues, which led to several cancelled test launches and at least one more flight test failure. So that is an ongoing problem for the Russians. Okay, we're going to move on to US aid and military assistance. I'm going to start with the issue and go and check out Jonathan Fink's video that should be out, I'm sure, at some point today, where he talks about the stoppage of the aid funding, foreign aid funding that is affecting Ukraine. Now, there have been these announcements, so he covers that in great detail. I know that because I was sitting opposite him while he recorded it. But and I was entranced by his dulcet tones. But if you want, the Americans have come out and said, look, we're not stopping military aid to Ukraine. This is a 90-day funding freeze that concerns other things, but it does concern Ukraine. I was at in fact, sorry to mention him again, but a Jonathan Fink event the other night where he was talking at the civil society in Kiev, and that organization is 70 to 80% funded by US aid. And if the US aid funding is stopped, then that whole organization might fail to exist. And there are heaps and heaps of organizations around the world in Ukraine, and indeed, as you can see here from this Guardian article and from Edward Hunter Christie on foreign military financing specifically, the Guardian writes that the following countries were expected recipients for 2025: Ukraine, Georgia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Taiwan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Djibouti, Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon. So that's foreign military funding, FMF financing, which is slightly different than the US aid stuff. But there are ways that the US is putting a stop on funding to all of these countries. They seem to have given a reprieve for Israel and Egypt alone. Other than that, everyone else is getting shafted. Now, the US military aid to Ukraine continues, including previously approved assistance packages, says Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation. However, it's all the other kind of funding that is done for. So, as Forbes reports, Trump's State Department pauses foreign aid, and the impact on Ukraine remains unclear. Unclear to some extent. I was speaking to a friend of ours called Yaroslava. People are in tears. People are distraught over this complete freeze of funding that affects good work of so many people and organizations. It's an absolute travesty. Associated Press reports, based on diplomatic cables, it is seen that the order prohibits any new spending for all assistance except humanitarian food programs and military aid to Israel and Egypt. And that is that. So it is incredibly wide sweeping. Jonathan, you're sitting there still. Jonathan Fink is sitting opposite me. Just give me a nod. Do you think this is a serious issue for Ukraine, the lack of this funding now? Yep. Yeah, there's a very somber nod of the head. So the people he talks to, sorry? And Georgia. That's a really good point. So it's not just it's not just Ukraine. Obviously, we listed all those countries, but Georgia is this country that desperately needs assistance to get its democratic representation and its ideals and mechanisms to flourish. In order to flourish, it needs that US aid funding and other forms of funding. And the US government has just absolutely swatted that funding down. And this will have huge ramifications. What a time to start doing stuff like this when you have countries on the precipice at the moment. And Georgia is desperate, is absolutely desperate and to suddenly lose all that funding is an absolute crime. Um, Now, the US Citizenship and Immigration Services have announced the suspension of the United for Ukraine U4U program for Ukrainians fleeing the war in the US. We had heard this was going to happen. The Voice of America reports this. Applications are currently suspended until the service reviews all requests that have already been submitted. So basically, emigrating from Ukraine to the US is now on hold effectively. Um, Now, the US considers buying weapons for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets, according to Keith Kellogg, the special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. The US government is considering purchasing weapons for Ukraine with money received from frozen Russian assets, and that will be to the tune of 300 billion. The US, I mean, they're clearly going to want all that money spent on them, but then you could argue that every country would want that. Um, the US is in a very kind of bullying mood at the moment. You can imagine that they might sort of go for this on a single proviso. They might facilitate the whole of the funding being, or they might advocate for or facilitate all of the frozen funding being used rather than just the profits from those assets. But on the single proviso that it goes towards American military-industrial complex, and of course, I wouldn't put it past them if they did something like that. But the other side of the coin is that, well, if the US is on board because of that transactional nature of Trump, then so be it. If it's going to get them the Ukrainians $300 billion worth of kit, so 6 and 1 half dozen the other day. You can make arguments both ways. The US is reportedly developing a cutting-edge missile bomb for Ukraine with a 463-kilometer range, including the quick-sink system to sink ships. Production could start by 2026 with support from Ukraine, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Of course, that's a very long-term project there, but you can go and check that out. Places like Euromaidan Press have an article on that. I'm not going to go into it now, but it just goes to show the cooperation between nations isn't just for stuff that's now. It is very forward-looking. I talked about this recently with regard to the German RCH 155s, those new self-propelled howitzers, where the orders were put in for them to come in 2025. And at that time, 2 years ago, people were like, what the frick are you doing putting in orders for 2 years' time when they need stuff now? But of course, 2 years has come along and they're receiving these pieces of kit, which are all, brand spanking new, or will be this year. And actually, okay, now we understand why you put long-term things in place as well as short-term things, because who knew? This war has taken that long, and those long-term projects are now coming to fruition. Okay, final thing to say is the US military equipment sales to foreign governments, and you could talk about this being the benefit to the US economy of this war in terms of advertising to other countries how good certain bits of kit are, such as HIMARS, etc., and then they sort of kind of fly off the shelves. Well, military equipment sales to foreign governments jumped 29%. That's massive considering the size of the industry in 2024, reaching a record $318.7 billion. According to the State Department, countries ramped up purchases to restock supplies sent to Ukraine as well. So that's a major part of this, and prepare for potential large-scale conflict. So people getting ready for a larger-scale war, worried about Russia, are tooling up their armies with as much equipment as they can get their hands on. And the US is, as you would imagine, being the number one arms exporter in the world, reaping some rewards economically from that and industrially. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thank you for watching. Take care, guys, and I will speak to you soon. Toodle pips.